Hi, أنا إيمان حسين, Art Director and Partner at Alchemy Design Studio.
Hi, أنا إيمان حسين, Architect and Artist. لما أول مرة اتقابلنا وكريم اداني البريف بتاع ال concept of the installation, it was very intriguing إن نفكر إزاي هنوصل حاجة فعلا حقيقية قوي عن مصر تشيل معاها تاريخ كبير قوي وإزاي نجرد الموضوع ده إن هو يكون بيوصل بالظبط حقيقة بتاعت كل ستايل كان له وجود في يوم من الأيام في وسط البلد. To understand and tackle not the form, not the static aspect of architecture but the life through the architecture and how it unfolds into narratives وازاي بتبقى معاصرة مع الحاضر وبتتغير as we move forward. فالفكرة ككل هي فكرة قوية جدا وكل era كان لسه كنا هنقسم كل حد فينا هيشتغل على one of the installations. it was challenging ازاي كل واحد هيمسك one era وهيدرسها كويس قوي ويعرف يوصل المضمون اللي فيها لحالة معاصرة متغيرة. I always like to work with or understand the solid and void of any era because architecture is all about that. يعني عموما النيجاتيف سبيس عموما اللي بيبقى حوالين العمارة أو هو اللي هو داخل العمارة هو كل شيء. يعني هو لو من غير النيجاتيف سبيس ده أنا عمري ما هعرف أقرأ الفورم نفسها. فكرة السوليد والفويد هي حاجة طريقة تجريد الواحد لما بيبص عينه بتبص عليها بيعرف بس بالضلمة والنور بيعرف يقرأ الأصل والروت بتاع الاركيتكتشر. Being an architect in this contemporary time has its challenges because we live in a time where everything has already existed. فلو بنتكلم على العمارة الإسلامية اللي هي أصل النيو إسلاميك, the solid and void was extremely prominent in it. The walls of the Islamic architecture were extremely solid and الفتحات كلها والكورتس وكل حاجة كانت دايما من جوه. The logic of the solid and void was very evident in that era and very very strong. فكرة البيازا عامة هي conceptually هي تجمع layers كتير قوي من existence مع بعض. ففكرة الانستليشن اللي بتجمع كل eras مع بعض is like the idea of coexistence and how differences can coexist in one space. وهو ده اللي احنا اصلا بنواجهه في مصر عموما في ثقافتنا وفي حضارتنا. هي it's very multi layered وبيجي مع ده العشوائيه اللي بتولد من وجود اشياء كتير قوي مع بعض. والعشوائيه دي ما ينفعش ان احنا نتغاضى عنها او ما ينفعش ان احنا نتجاهلها. العشوائيه هي برضو جزء كبير قوي من الواقع الحاضر اللي موجود عندنا in the contemporary time we live in. started exploring art and I studied with مجد السجيني وابتديت أشوف إزاي the practice of art can affect my practice of architecture and vice versa. لقيت إن هي it's a process that manifests differently بس actually قلبها هو واحد. هي فكرة التغيير اللي موجودة في الحياة عموما. فالنهارده ابتديت اوصل لبوينت ان انا لقيت ان البراكتس دي والبراكتس دي هما بيفيدوا بعض او هما طالعين نابعين من نفس الفكره. وببقى سعيده جدا لما الاقي ان الحاجه انا بلاقيها هما وصلوا لبعض مش انا اللي وصلتهم لبعض. But then there comes a point where you've created a problem because you've taken steps maybe that النتيجة بتاعتهم طلعت مختلفة عن اللي كان اللي أنا كنت متخيلة اللي هيطلع. فخلقت مشكلة والتفاعل مع المشكلة وعلاج المشكلة وإزاي إن المشكلة ممكن تؤدي لفكرة جديدة خالص. فهي فكرة ال problem solving هي بقى دي الحاجة ال common in architecture as well. Because in architecture, when you have an idea, the process of creation happens before it's projected onto life. It happens when you're drawing a sketch, when you're working on like the plans, the sections, the elevations. كلها شغل لسه على الورق. You're putting the design together and you're making sure it is solved on paper before it comes to life. So the idea is في العمارة الإسلامية usually the forms were very dynamic on a level of plan. They used to follow different grids that had to do with orientation كده. And I usually like in my work to look for a framework to start from. Having certain grids that have to do with the context, have to do with urban elements or direction. It is always a good starting point. And then working with basic masses, for example, like forms that intersect on different grids, and finding a place in between of how to make these two different grids meet. So the idea of solid and void is usually present في كل حاجة, on plan, in elevation, كله. I usually like the idea of being clear on where I have the solid masses and where I have the voids, whether on a macro scale or on a micro scale. And I actually believe in these grids they represent اللي العمارة الإسلامية كانت بتحاول توصل له philosophically. عندنا the worldly aspects وعندنا the spiritual. So they're two different important aspects. والالتقاء ما بينهم اللي هو what's in between is what the person is usually experiences. ما بقاش في موضوع ان انا هخش في ضلمه وبعدين هطلع انا اوريدي في نور بس انا هنا الحته دي متسقفه. انا بتكلم بقى على اللايتنج. هنعمل ايه في اللايتنج؟ هنا انا المفروض هيبقى عندي تكست وعايزه صوت هنور التكست دي. اوكي وغالبا هحط تكست برضه حته من الحيطان اللي على اليمين يبقى على الوول او ابلاين. لا بس انا عايزه اقرا التكست. فالابلاين ممكن ما تبقيش عارفه داون لاين حاجه دايركشن. اوكي فادي اول نقطه عايزه انورها على اليمين وعايزه انور النقطه الثانيه اللي هنا على الشمال. The architecture of the installation needs to feel grounded. It's coming out of earth. And at the same time, the openings in the installation make us connect with the outside world, with something beyond a life here on earth. What we did was we wanted to build the concept on the idea of space and time. So space, what we did with space is that we played with the concept of the fold. But as you walk in the architecture folds onto itself, so you get a feeling that
you get a sense of space إن الحيطان بتميل على الواحد وفي حتت بتضيق وحتت بتوسع. And we also played with the idea of scale. We took very abstract concept is the abstraction of المقرنص. المقرنص, when you take a very close look at it, you see that it has folds. And these folds are actually lines of deconstruction. So you can actually abstract المقرنص and take the patterns of المقرنص and you can play with it. You find so many endless patterns that you can work with. Blowing up something in scale so much that you can actually walk into it and experience it closely. It's like you're exploring one corner of Islamic architecture, but in a progressive sense, in a progressive way. But that was the idea of space. But the value is actually in the enclosure of space. It's in the space embodied within. So your trip or your journey inwards is also a trip or journey into yourself, and you feel like you're contained within the space that makes you even look deeper into oneself. So you see how the light breaks, how the shadow breaks, how the patterns change, so on and so forth. What we wanted to do is also to use sound effects. So I chose صوت العصافير, which is something that we always listen to. It's an anchor in nature. You can always refer back to it to connect. And also the use of water in the space, because also the sound of water, it helps you connect with nature. And of course the light or the sunlight that is simulated inside the space to give this feeling of kairos. فكرة إن إحنا كنا GLC طالبة مننا إن إحنا نعبر عن the color trends بس برسالة برضو. عندنا رسالة بنتكلم عن العمارة المصرية in downtown Cairo وإزاي اللون ممكن يساعدنا في إن إحنا نعبر عن حاجة زي دي. كان في brief حلو قوي إحنا خدناه عن GLC's color trends وابتدينا نشوف إزاي كل ستايل أو كل حاجة إزاي communicate different layers of colors and different hues of colors differently. فبس استخدام اللون ما هواش لازم يكون استخدام مباشر، هو له اشكال كتير قوي. لان احنا ابتدينا من فكره الابيض which contains all color to الواجهه الثانيه اللي هي السوداء which is the absence of color, and the color comes actually in between. واللون بيتغير مع حركه الفولدز المختلفه، التكسيرات اللي في الحيطان. different shades of tone you see it and you see how it differs with the movement of light also. And I chose one of the earth tones of Egypt, which was one of the wasabi color trends of GLC, and I used it with a texture to feel how rough, how earthy it is, how rooted it is. If I were to summarize this whole experience in one word, I would say it's actually the power of coexistence.